There are wars that reshape nations, and there are days that reshape history itself. World War II was a long and brutal conflict, but it did not change the world all at once. It shifted, step by step, through a handful of crucial moments when leaders made choices that could not be undone. This documentary tells the story of 7 days that changed the course of World War II, moments when history stood still and the destiny of millions turned. Each of these days began quietly, with people waking up to what they thought would be an ordinary morning. By nightfall, the world they knew had vanished. This is not just a story of armies and strategies, but of human courage, fear, and endurance across battlefields, skies, cities, and seas. These are the 7 days that changed the world forever. On the morning of September 1st, 1939, German forces crossed the Polish border and launched a massive attack by land, air, and sea. The roar of aircraft filled the sky, and cities like Warsaw faced bombardment from the very first hours. For years, Europe had watched Adolf Hitler's rise with alarm. The remilitarization of the Rhineland, the annexation of Austria, the invasion of Czechoslovakia. But many still believed war could be avoided through diplomacy. That illusion ended the moment tanks rolled into Poland. Within days, Britain and France declared war on Germany, and the Second World War began. For ordinary Europeans, this day marked the end of a fragile peace and the return of a nightmare many thought they would never live again. By the spring of 1940, German troops struck again, this time in Western Europe. The so-called Blitzkrieg, or Lightning War, brought a new kind of military speed and coordination. French and British forces could not hold the front. Entire divisions were surrounded, and cities fell one after another. In June, with Paris occupied and defenses collapsing, French leaders faced an impossible choice: continue a hopeless fight or surrender to avoid total destruction. When the French government agreed to an armistice, Europe gasped. Britain now stood alone, isolated across the Channel, as Nazi Germany controlled almost all of Western Europe. This day changed the balance of the war and showed that no nation, no matter how strong, was safe from Hitler's army. For months after France's fall, the skies over Britain became the battleground for Europe's future. German bombers targeted airfields, factories, and cities, hoping to destroy the Royal Air Force before launching an invasion. But Britain fought back. Radar technology, skilled pilots, and a population united behind Winston Churchill held the line. Then came the critical day, when the Luftwaffe suffered such heavy losses that the German command realized victory was slipping away. Hitler postponed the invasion indefinitely. The Battle of Britain ended not with a peace treaty, but with survival. A small island nation still standing, defiant and alone. It was proof that courage and innovation could block even the most powerful empire. Unable to conquer Britain, Hitler turned his gaze eastward. On June 22, 1941, he launched Operation Barbarossa, the largest invasion in human history. 3 million German soldiers marched into the Soviet Union, expecting a quick victory. Instead, they faced fierce resistance, vast distances, and brutal winters. This day opened a front that would consume millions of lives. Germany, now fighting on two sides, began to stretch its resources thin. Hitler believed the Soviet Union would collapse quickly. He was wrong. This decision marked the beginning of his downfall and set the stage for some of the bloodiest battles ever fought. While Europe burned, tensions in Asia reached a breaking point. Japan sought to dominate the Pacific, while the United States tried to stop its expansion through embargoes and negotiations. Then, on December 7, 1941, the world changed in a single morning. Japanese aircraft launched a surprise attack on Pearl Harbor, the main U.S. naval base in Hawaii. Explosions shattered the calm. Battleships burned in the harbor. Over 2,000 American lives were lost. The next day, the United States declared war on Japan, and soon after, on Germany and Italy. A conflict that had begun in Europe now spanned every ocean. From that day, World War II truly became global, and the industrial power of the United States began to shape the outcome. In 1942, deep inside the Soviet Union, the city of Stalingrad became a symbol of defiance. German forces reached its outskirts, determined to capture it before winter. Street by street, building by building, the two armies fought like never before. Civilians hid in basements. Entire neighborhoods turned into ruins. Then came the turning day, when Soviet forces surrounded the German Sixth Army, cutting it off from supplies and reinforcements. In February 1943, the trapped soldiers surrendered. For the first time, the German war machine was decisively broken. Stalingrad was more than a victory. It was proof that even the mightiest army could bleed and fall. From that day, the tide of the war began to flow backward toward Berlin. By mid-1944, Allied forces prepared for the greatest amphibious invasion in history, D-Day. The plan was bold: land thousands of troops along the coast of Normandy and begin the liberation of Western Europe. On June 6th, under stormy skies, soldiers crossed the English Channel. The beaches, codenamed Omaha, Juno, Gold, Sword, and Utah, became battlegrounds of unimaginable intensity. Casualties were heavy, but by nightfall, the Allies had secured a foothold. From that day, the liberation of Europe was no longer a dream, but a reality in motion. Each step inland brought armies closer to Paris and to Germany's defeat. Even after Germany's surrender in May 1945, the war raged in the Pacific. Japan refused to yield despite devastating bombings and mounting losses. Then, on August 6, 1945, a single bomber flew over Hiroshima. Moments later, the world witnessed the power of the atomic age. In an instant, an entire city was destroyed. A flash, a cloud, silence. 3 days later, a second bomb struck Nagasaki. The shock was unbearable. Within days, Japan surrendered. The war was over, but the world had changed forever. A new age of fear and power had begun, one where humanity held the means to end itself. World War II was shaped by millions of acts of bravery and tragedy, but some days stand apart, days when the world seemed to change its direction. The invasion that began the conflict, the fall of a great nation, the defense of an island, the turning of the tide in the east, the shock that drew America into war, the storming of the beaches that brought freedom back to Europe, and the explosion that ended it all. Each moment reshaped borders, alliances, and beliefs about power and survival. To understand these days is to understand how fragile peace can be, and how suddenly history can turn. Because behind every day on a calendar, there are people whose lives remind us that history is, above all, human.